Hello everyone, welcome. Today I'll be reading about a book named The World, which is written by Marlen Haushofer. Let's begin. Today, the 5th of November, I shall begin my report. I shall set everything down as precisely as I can. But I don't even know if today really is the 5th of November. Over the course of the past winter, I have lost track of a few days. I can't even say what day of the week it is, but I don't think that's very important. All I have to rely on is a few meager jottings. Meager because I never expected to write this report, and I am afraid that much that I remember will be different from my real experiences. All reports probably suffer from this shortcoming. I'm not writing for the sheer joy of writing. So many things have happened to me that I must write if I'm not to lose my reason. There's no one here to think and care for me. I'm quite alone, and I must try to survive the long, dark winter months. I don't expect the notebooks will ever be found. At the moment, I don't even know whether I hope they will be. Perhaps I will know once I have finished. I have taken on this task to keep me from starting into the gloom and being frightened, for I am frightened. Fear creeps up on me from all sides, and I don't want to wait until it gets to me and overpowers me. I shall ride until darkness falls, and this new and familiar walk should make my mind tired, empty, and drowsy. I'm not afraid of morning, only of the long, gloomy afternoons. I don't know what time it is exactly. Probably around 3 in the afternoon. I have lost my watch, but it wasn't much use to me before. A tiny gold watch, really nothing but an expensive toy that never showed the right time. I have a ballpoint pen and 3 pencils. The ballpoint is almost dry, and I very much dislike writing in pencil. My writing doesn't stand out clearly against the paper. The delicate gray strokes blur into the yellowish background. But I have no choice, after all. I am writing on the backs of the old diaries and yellowed business paper. The writing paper belonged to Hugo Rutlinger, a great collector and hypochondriac. This report should really start with Hugo, since had it not been for his mania for collecting and his hypochondria, I wouldn't be sitting here. I probably wouldn't be alive at all. Hugo, my cousin, Louis' husband, and a fairly wealthy man. His money came from a saucepan factory. They were quite special saucepans, produced by nobody but Hugo. And fortunately, although I had it explained to me often enough, I have forgotten what was unique about those saucepans, and it's irrelevant to the matter at hand. Anyway, Hugo was so wealthy that he needed to do something special, so he organized a hunt. He could just as easily have bought himself race horses or a yacht. But Hugo was afraid of horses, and felt sick the minute he set foot on a boat. He only kept up the hunt, too, for appearance sake. He was a bad shot, and loathed shooting innocent deer. He invited his business partners along, and they, together with Louis and the huntsman, were the ones who backed the game, while Hugo sat in an armchair in front of the hunting lodge. hands folded across his belly, and dozed in the sand. He was so agitated and overtired that he nodded off the minute he sat down in a chair. An enormous fat man, tormented by dog anxieties, with too many people making too many demands on him. I was very fond of him, and shared his love of the forest, and a few quiet days in the hunting lodge. It didn't bother him if I stayed somewhere nearby while he slept in his chair. I went for little walks and enjoyed the silence after the hubbub of the city. Louis was a passionate hunter, a healthy, red-haired character who threw puzzles at every man who crossed her path. Since she hated housework, it was very pleasant for her that I was there to pay a bit of attention to Hugo, make cocoa and mix his innumerable potions. He was obsessively concerned with his health, something I didn't really understand at the time, because his life was one constant rush and his only pleasure a little nap in the sand. He tended to feel very sorry for himself, and apart from his efficiency in his business, which I had to take for granted, as fearful as a little child, he had a great level of perfection and order, and always travelled with 2 toothbrushes. Of the things he used every day, he had several of each. This seemed to give him a sense of security. Otherwise, he was thoroughly cultured, tactful, and bad at cards. I can't remember ever holding a conversation of any importance with him. Sometimes he would make little moves in that direction, but would quickly stop himself, perhaps for shyness, or simply because it was too much of an effort. In any case, this was very pleasant for me, because we would only have been embarrassed. At the time everyone was talking about nuclear wars and their consequences, and this led Hugo to keep a little store of food and other important things in his hunting lodge. Louis, who found the whole business ridiculous, got annoyed and worried that he would tell everybody and encourage burglars. She was probably right, but there were these matters where concerned Hugo could develop an obstinacy that brooked no opposition. He got pains in his heart and cramps in his stomach until Louise gave him. But she basically didn't care either way. On the 13th of April, the Rootlingers invited me to drive with them to the hunting lodge. I had been widowed for 2 years at the time. My 2 daughters were almost grown up, and I could use my time as I saw fit. Not that I made much use of my freedom. I had always been sedentary by nature, and felt happiest at home. But I seldom turned down Louis' invitations. I loved the hunting lodge and the forest, and was happy to take on the 3-hour car journey. On the 13th of April, too, I accepted the invitation, where we were to stay for 3 days, and no one else was invited. The hunting lodge is actually a 2-story wooden villa built out of massive branches and still in good condition today. On the ground floor, there's a big rustic kitchen with a bedroom next to it, and then another little bedroom. On the first floor, ringed by a wooden veranda, are 3 little bedrooms for the guests. It was in one of these rooms, the smallest one, that I was staying At the time, about 50 yards away, on a slope leading down to the stream, there was a little log cabin for the handsman, merely a one-room hut, in fact, and beside it, just next to the road, was a wooden garage that Hugo had built. So we drove for 3 hours and stopped in the village to collect Hugo's dog from the headsman. The dog, a Bavarian bloodhound, was called Lynx, and although it was Hugo's property, he had grown up with the huntsman and been trained by him. Curiously, the huntsman had managed to teach Lynx to acknowledge Hugo as his master. Certainly, he paid no attention to Louise. He didn't belong to her, and stayed out of her way. He treated me with friendly neutrality, but liked being near me. He was a beautiful creature, with a dark reddish-brown coat and an excellent hunting dog. We talked to the huntsman a little, and it was agreed that he should go out stalking with Louise the following evening. She intended to shoot a roebuck. The close season finished on the 1st of May. This conversation dragged on as they will in the country, and even Louise, who could never understand this, checked her impatience, so as not to put the huntsman, who was indispensable to her, in bad humour. We didn't get to the hunting lodge until about 3 o'clock. Hugo immediately set about carting new supplies from the boot of his car into the bedroom beside the kitchen. I made coffee on the spirit stove, and after our snack, Hugo was already starting to nod off. Louis suggested that he go back to the village with her. It was pure bed nets, of course, but she was very clever about it, saying that movement was imperative for Hugo's health. At around 5 o'clock, she had finally persuaded him, and set off with him triumphantly. I knew they would end up in the village inn. Louis loved to mix with the woodcutters and farm hands, and it never occurred to her that the sly fellows might be laughing at her behind her back. I cleared the crockery for the table and hung the clothes in the wardrobes. When I had finished, I sat down in the sand on the bench by the house. It was a fine, warm day, and according to the weather report, it was due to stay bright. The sun slanted over the spruce trees and was close to setting. The hunting lodge is in a little basin at the end of the gorge, beneath steeply ascending mountains. While I sat there and felt the last warmth on my face, I saw Lynx coming back. He had probably disobeyed Louise, and she had sent him back as a punishment. I could see she had scolded him. He came up to me, looked at me fruitfully, and laid his head on my lap. We stayed sitting there like that for a while. I stroked Lynx and spoke comforting words, because I knew Louise treated the dog in quite the wrong way. When the sun disappeared behind the spruce trees, it grew cold, and bluish shadows fell across the glade. I went into the houses with Lynx, lit the big stove, and started preparing a kind of risotto. I didn't have to, of course, but I was hungry myself, and I knew that Hugo liked a proper hot dinner.